Evening all, let's continue our look at the evolution of chess style by checking out the last decisive game of that first match between Efim Bogoljubov and Alexander Alekhine. This was in game 22. So Alexander playing black. It was like a maximum 30 game match with a 6-point lead, or the first thing to happen, a 6-point lead or 30. If it was an insurmountable 6-point lead, then it's like the end of the match. So after this game, I think a couple more draws secured it for Alexander. So basically, this was the last decisive game of that first match. E4, E5, and we have what seemed to be a typical Roy Lopez up until a certain point here, where Alexander now played D6. And actually D6 highlights a strong point plan, as my friend Paul would say, or overprotection of E5. Now usually I consider the overprotection of E4 to be more significant, but E5 is often useful as well as a basis for attack, to get all your pieces pointing to E5, where they're sort of coordinated as a team. Naturally, if you pick important central point all your pieces at it, they'll be coordinated, strong, and that will be a good basis for the attack. Art of war, put yourself beyond defeat before going on to the attack. And we see that kind of mechanism here positionally. If you start to look at black's moves now, after c3, white's traditionally going to get that centre and put pressure on e5. So how does black deal with it? Bishop d7 unpins the knight. Okay, so which means this pin isn't as significant. d4 can still be played though. But now, interestingly, is the move g6. And can white exploit actually taking in an e5? I don't think so, because of bishop takes e4. If bishop takes, d takes, bishop e4 immediately. Otherwise takes, bishop c6, bishop c6. It's going to be about equal. Queen d8. Well, we could engine check this just to make sure that there's no problem here with e5. So say, well, the best move actually is given as bishop g5 or castles, but say d takes is played. My engine's managed to crash. Say d takes here. Bishop takes, I think just bishop takes. And actually black's going to be better here. Black can't afford to go for this. Actually, white can't afford to go for that. Black's better there. So at the moment, this is a viable setup, just playing g6 here. That's really the main point I wanted to make. g6 is fine here, apparently. So bishop g5, probably one of the stronger moves, causing a kind of weakness on the diagonal. If the f-pawn has to be moved, this is going to be a weakened diagonal. If knight here, then there might be something embarrassing, actually, like bishop f6. Bishop e7, the bishop really wants to go here. So f6 starts to be the logical move here, crying out to be played, which it is. And it means also f7 can be resourcefully used now by the knight, rather cheekily, with knight h6, just to come back to f7, which makes sense for black's plan, of e5 strong pointing. Everything will be on e5 soon. Castles, bishop g7. So d takes is not such a major problem at the moment. So knight f7 covering g5 now as well, as protecting, adding further support for e5. So black now castles. And now actually white does take on e5, which means structurally, and after d takes, they're both sharing this d file. White may have a useful d5 now to use. But he plays bishop c5, the rook moves, now bishop b3. So is this kind of annoying, these two bishops? This pin, is it annoying? Really, it's difficult for white to exploit that at the moment. Any bishop f7's king takes. Although the king's brought out, queen b3, there's always bishop e6. As long as g5 is covered, there's no major disaster at the moment for this pin on the knight. So black actually can afford, I think, to use this kicking move, b6, kick the bishop. It didn't go to a3, it went to e3, still eyeing the queenside pawns, so b6 in particular. Okay, so queen e7. Now after queen e2, another pawn is eyed a6, so sort of tying down the rook. If the rook ever moves, then queen might munch on a6. knight cd8 starts this like fianchetto of the knight idea with knight b7, which could come to c5 and also d6. So bishop d5 was played, and actually black didn't mind losing the light square bishop. Now, interesting, in King's Indian type positions, you really want to try and preserve this bishop because it adds impetus to the attack with possibilities of sacking on h3 later. But Alexander didn't mind playing bishop c6, and we get a kind of King's Indian type position now even more after this next move, c4 is played, because white's going to get c-file pressure, semi-open c-file pressure against c7. I'm not sure if black was forced to play bishop takes d5, but maybe if he doesn't, maybe c5 is going to be useful for white in any case. So I think his idea is that he can keep a blockade on the dark squares. He can take and fianchetto this knight soon with knight b7 to keep a grip on these two dark squares. So f5 for the moment though. Now after knight c4, now we see this knight b7. So keeping an keeping a grip on white playing d6 as well, which might undermine b6 in some cases. So this might be quite necessary here in response to knight c4. Rook ac1, now rook ad8. So actually, you know, black wasn't really threatening before fe because of knight d4 picking up the pawn with advantage, and that would be a very nice knight on e4. Usually a winning knight in King's Indian type positions to have a beautiful knight on e4 with a block with an isolated kind of e pawn. It will be like the end of black's dynamism, and the the pawn chain dynamism is important here for a sort of avalanche to get key squares as well as damage white's king safety. Okay, so but now with fe there's rook d5, so actually d6 was played here. Maybe this wasn't the best move because fundamentally it's swapping actually a centre pawn, the d pawn, for a flank pawn. So after knight takes, we see that white's lost that centre pawn and getting a flank pawn, a6. And not only this, but now Alexander can seize the d-file, which he does with queen d7. So black's trump cards are improving, strengthening that d-file. White can't even play rook d1 at the moment, and still threaten with annoying things like fe and f4 even might be very useful here. Actually just winning material straight off the bat. Bishop can't go without rook takes d2. So f4 is actually a major threat to deal with. So rook c2 makes sense from 2 points of view. If f4, the bishop can actually now can come back to d2, doesn't have to go back to c1. The rook's protecting d2, but also the rook can be used for doubling up rooks on c7. So dual purpose move there. But even so, c5. Now here actually, intuitively I thought if this was like a King's Indian type position, white wants to increase that pressure on the queen side, and doing a move like b4, it seems to be crying out for b4, and in fact engines like b4 here. After b4 takes queen c4, and white's got a lot of pressure, compensation, but white played a bit timidly actually here. He played a4 with the idea maybe of timidly like offering exchange of queens, queen b5. I guess also b5 might indirectly attacking the queen, but I think the main thing is queen b5 and also maybe a5 just to try and undermine c5 like that. So there's a few functions possible with a4, but Alexander's not concerned at the moment. He just plays f4, gaining a bit of space, and now gaining even more space and concrete threats now of g4 takes queen g4, where rook g6 would be really crushing the white king. Threats of queen f3, queen g2 mate. So white has to do something about that. Can't allow g4 here with the queen coming in, with the rook backing up the queen. So he offers the trade of queens now with queen b5. And actually here is a key thing. Later in Alexander's career he lost a bit of confidence according to Kotov by not going into endgames. But here there's an opportunity for a simplified position with white not really having ideal double b pawns and black having good pressure still on the d-file and good pieces generally. So he doesn't mind the exchange of queens. He can switch plans, and we see that a lot, especially in Alekhine's earlier confident games. In his height of his powers, he could switch plans freely. He could have confidence that he can win endgames, and this is a very good position to exchange queens. So he does the exchange of queens. No need to try and do anything too clever. After all, the queen's eyeing the e8 rook anyway. So, and you know, white might have a dangerous initiative building up with a5 if black's not careful. So he exchanges off queens, and now rook d3. Okay, this move rook d3 means actually d6 is now vacated, where it would fork these two pawns. I think that's the key purpose of the move rook d3, which is evidenced by the game now. Knight d6, just forking those two pawns. Rook a6, okay, attacking b6. Again, here, by the way, or earlier, instead of the move rook a6, the move here, rook a1, b4 was also potentially possible here as a pawn, as trying to get more aggression for the pieces. So something like this wouldn't have been that bad for white still. White would still have a bit of counterplay. It seems white was playing a little bit timidly not to take these opportunities in this game for b4, but maybe he's already disheartened because he's down in the match. So this rook a1 is another sort of timid kind of maneuver to try and slowly attack b6, you know, with rook a6. But rook b8 protects it. And now after bishop c3, Alexander's not afraid to exchange off e-pawn for e-pawn here, and even, you know, get two other minor pieces off the board. Because now what happens, his rooks are actually quite dangerous after check. It's starting to get critical actually for white's king safety now. Now after knight d2, menacing threats of like mating that knight f1 to g3 and then rook h1 mating. So white has to gain a square for the king to avoid a mating onslaught. Now rook e8, and now the only move to engine analysis is in this position after rook e8, after rook e8, would have been to play knight g4, and we get this very interesting technical variation where white's still worse, he's just going to be a piece down. So this is with best play, scientifically best play, just using that pin on b6, winning a pawn here, and the king's not getting mated. It's still a piece up for black, so it's no big deal. So white went down quite quickly now and elegantly after knight f3, going into a nice mating net, generous to Alexander. After taking, the rooks joined together on the first rank, threatening, you know, a 1-2, quick 1-2 knockout with rook h1, rook g1 mate. So the white king tokenly goes to h3 as though king g4 is the escape route plan, but that's now sealed off rather neatly with h5. And now really the white king is getting mated. You know, takes, check, king g2, rook g1. I'll just show you that for aesthetics now, just to make that totally clear. The pawn's stopping the poor king. The poor king can't even go there, so these two pawns are joining in, and now we have this mate with the two rooks here. And look aesthetically at the rooks. You know, these rooks need more days to do stuff, even in this position. More moves, more days to do stuff. So let's go back. White played a bit timidly, missed some opportunities, key opportunities I think, on the queen side with b4s, in a couple of occasions at least in this game. Black's play was very interesting from a stylistic point of view, playing an unusual kind of treatment of the Roy Lopez, but we have seen that earlier in the Evolution of Styles series. Steinitz once played a beautiful fianchetto bishop Roy Lopez type game with a similar kingside pawn avalanche, and they're all echoing, you know, the power of pawns. Philidor, you know, the pawns can really add spirit to the game and add, you know, beauty to the game. You know, not only gaining space on the king side, but getting key squares, generally getting superior pieces. And that was demonstrated here. But first we see this kind of overprotection of e5, strong pointing e5 with the fianchetto system, not minding playing f6, weakening the diagonal, because really, if that diagonal is not you know, a majorly exploitable weakness, then it doesn't matter to slightly weaken that. It's like a king's engine anyway. This position with black, you know, playing usually for f5, f4. But black in this sort of position does have to be careful about the central situation. And here actually, White, okay, although he resisted the temptation to go into a King's Union like tempos down, and he could have taken on d7 and played c4, you know, Black would then have a free hand on the king side with the centre closed. So at least he didn't like take that decision, which maybe strategically is worse, but at least, you know, he'd get rid of the light square bishop, which would be one perk. But no, he plays d takes e5, and he, you know, Alexander allows him actually this structure with the pawn on d5. Curiously, in this continuation, after bishop c6, Alexander does take on d5. I wonder actually if this was the best approach, and not just to try and carry on the attack. So maybe that's slightly, I don't know, slightly controversial, because it gives White semi-open c-file pressure and these possibilities later of b4 which weren't really used. Actually, let's just engine check this position from Black's perspective. What does an engine say? I don't think it would rate bishop d5. Actually, just giving f5. Forget bishop d5, f5 or queen d7. And I just think, you know, if White hasn't got that aggressive pawn chain, c5, I think there's just b5 or something, or just carrying on with the attack, f4. It's no big deal. So really, I don't know. This seemed to be a bit strategically strange, this decision of bishop takes d5, you know, giving White a bit of queenside pressure. But other than that, I think it was a nicely played like knight fianchetto here, which sort of soaked up some of the pressure, and White was faced with this constant threat of either f4 or fe, which Alexander accentuated now with this rook d8 move. So is White's centre going to be crumbling here? And maybe this is a bit of a panic decision, giving away the centre pawn for a measly, you know, a6 pawn. With Black now controlling that d-file, very good grip on the d-file after queen d7, and the rook also on d6. So obviously after f4 g5 is in a position to switch to a coordinate for a kingside onslaught here, which is demonstrated. But here is a key opportunity where b4 might have been good to try and use, you know, White's trump card to get some serious threats going. But no, a4, and then humbly offering the exchange of queens as a reaction, a defensive reaction perhaps to this imminent g4 threat. But, you know, Alexander, he's confident in these years, unlike later years where apparently, you know, he was more reluctant in his own ability, not so confident in his own ability in endgames, but here he's assessed this as good for Black. Double White's pawns, play this position, get the knight to d6. It's a strong, very strong knight. Doesn't matter about more minor pieces coming off. He can still weave a mating net with the two rooks and the knight here if White's not careful. White's played the disastrous knight f3, losing very quickly now to this mating net. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that game. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. If you haven't already subscribed to the King's Crusher channel, please do. Don't miss out on any new videos. Subscribing is free and you get notified of any new videos. And, you know, check out you know, the previous videos in the Evolution series. I'm hoping, you know, we're reaching a better understanding of how style is being evolved, and we're going to do some videos of general Alexander games from various points of view of style before visiting other World Championship matches now. So a bit of an interlude over the next few videos from the World Championship games. Thanks very much.